And hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this slightly late opener for the very early ComicBase live stream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford. Here we're going to spend about an hour talking about all things comics and ComicBase related. Give me just a moment as I rotate a camera here ever so slightly. It's been a little absolute chaos down here because I'm actually getting ready to head down immediately after the show, drive down to Florida where I'm trying to set up a household and wiring everything and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Just been all sixes and sevens, as the Brits would say. But anyway, welcome everyone. Let's get to what we're going to be talking about here. We'll be doing a little bit of comic-based news, actually, decent amount of it. And then want to spend part of the show talking about all the new toys that are coming up in our lives, which basically means gadgets. Everything from Windows releases to what's new on the hardware front. Give you as quickly as I can kind of a breakdown of what to expect in the coming year and coming months in particular on the tech horizon, and then we'll get into your questions. Speaking of which, please do post your questions to the chat, and if you mark them with at ComicBase TV, it does a good job of letting them pop out a little bit more so I can see them and make sure I get them answered. Anyway, so let's get down to it. Let me just clear a couple of windows away or rearrange things the way I like them, and let's get it done. All right, yeah. And by the way, hey Mike, Oro, Ed, just great to see everyone so early. I know this is not the usual time. I had a choice between do I want to drive deep into the night, and honestly, as little sleep as I've been getting, that is a bad recipe for things. I've come to learn over my years is driving during daylight hours when you're still awake. Well, especially the still awake part, huge in terms of safety. So I'm going to try doing that this time out. All right, let's get to it. So first of all, on the ComicBase news, we just released the third quarter update of ComicBase. It was originally entitled 21.0.3. We actually had a perfect quarterly release schedule for the points, matching up everything right up until we figured out, courtesy of a user, that a last-minute change we had made to the code, and I really do mean like the last day or two, it broke part of the program in a way that you didn't find out until you dug in a little bit. Basically, if you did anything that's selected by an issue. So 21.0.3 from I think Friday became 21.0.4 by Monday. Anyway, and it took care of these selecting issues. If you had trouble over the weekend, please just download the update again. You'll get the latest and greatest. Another thing that was kind of interesting is we spent some time over the last day or two, and thanks to everyone who helped us with that one, tracking down an issue where a couple of requests, it had to do with particular combinations of characters in user IDs and passwords, were accidentally tripping up some security stuff on our site that was making them look like invalid requests. So if you had trouble connecting to the servers using the ComicBase builds over the last day or two, please download the latest one, and that should take care of it for you. And if not, it'll give us a really detailed error message about what's going on with your internet connection, so it'll help us help you. So please let us know, and we'll take it from there. But please go ahead and download the latest version of 21.0.x, whatever you've got down there under My Account Registrations at ComicBase.com, and you'll see a bunch of cool new stuff. Cool new stuff number one, obviously, is we actually pushed forward a feature that was going to be in the next major release of ComicBase. We moved it up several months to be in this release, which is the ability to handle variations that go dozens, if not hundreds, of variants for the same comic book in a much more elegant manner. There were a couple dozen comic books published throughout all the years that had more variants than there were letters in the alphabet. And so we got into this weird conundrum of what do you do with, say, Godzilla King of the Monsters #1, where if you ordered, I think it was 500 or 1,000 copies of it ahead of time, they would actually commission a artist to show your your store being destroyed by Godzilla on the cover. And I think something like 57 maybe stores put in the order amounts that qualified that. But we're sitting there at ComicBase Central here saying, well, how the heck do we deal with this one? Because if you label your variants 1A, 1B, 1C, etc., it kind of caps out at the 26th variant with Z. And so what do you do after that? And so what we had done in the past is really abuse the printing field. So we'd labeled them as 1A, second printing, third printing, fourth printing, 15th printing, all the way through the 57th printing, which they really weren't. They were all first printings. And it just got super confusing. And then other people were trying to deal with Vampirella covers for the latest series, where they say, well, this one's a lot like that other cover. cover, but it's, you know, missing the logo information. It's the virgin cover, or it's like that cover, but it's not colored, or it's red tinted, or it's green tinted. And so they try to make second, third, fourth printings of the R cover or something, and it was all a big mess. So what we did in this last build is we adjusted them all so that all those things will show up. ComicBase will automatically, when you download the new version, grow variations V27 through V150, and frankly, we can extend that one as far as we need to. But it'll do that automatically, which had to handle any comic book that's ever been published in the world up till now. Then we've gone and we've reclassified those 24 covers in 24 comics, so all the covers in excess of the 26th one got put into really a much more reasonable order. If you do have any of those 24 or so comics that had hundreds of variants on them, or dozens of variants on them, please have a look when you download the next update. You might see some items listed in the unrecognized items category, in which case it's worth your time to go and move your inventory under its proper new designation, because that way you'll get pricing updates for those issues. If you don't, nothing bad happens to your inventory. It's just that it can't be sold on Atomic Avenue because it won't be recognized, and you won't get price updates. So if it does apply to you, and honestly, there aren't that many people collecting, greater than 27 variants on a lot of things. So there's a very good chance this will not apply to it all. But if it does, do take a few minutes and move those over, and then hopefully it'll never become this bad again in the future, because we've at least got a system for dealing with that now. That's a big thing from the ComicBase standpoint. Now, from a user standpoint, another big thing about this last version, 21.0.x, is we added over 60,000 items to the darn program. I mean, this is nuts. We added over 30,000 magazines, but also almost 30,000 new comic books, as well as a ton of books and other things like that. I mean, it used to be, I'm not so old, that I remember when 30,000 issues added to an edition of ComicBase would have been a great yearly update for us to be like, yeah, we really put in a lot of work this year. We added 30,000 comics in the database. We added 60,000 items in a quarter. I mean, this is psychotic, and not to mention, probably hundreds of thousands of price changes over the same period of time. I cannot believe the amount of content that we're playing with these days, and thank you all who have contributed to it. You guys are just knocking it out of the park, and we're happy to be there along with this crazy ride with you. So thank you all for everyone who contributed. And I hope everyone enjoys the new content. So, all right, moving on. Let's do a quick check of where we're at. Hey, Greg, nice to see you. Great new stuff over here. Yes, Crisis TV. He says, ComicBase TV Crisis of Infinite Godzillas. Yeah, absolutely. I can't make out what that emoji is. Is it a llama? I love how emojis now, not only are we basically reducing human speech into a series of symbols once again, so we're reverting to cuneiform, but beyond that, they are all also appearing in different colors and tans and shapes, and they also look different on different platforms. So infamously, for instance, the gun emoji on Apple decided they were going to cure all violence in the universe. They were turned into a squirt gun on one. But we have problems even, we figured out that it gets a little bit more attention in your mail if we send out mailings with, like, if it's the 4th of July, we'll put rockets or fireworks or something like that, which, could look either thing from like a festive firework to crazy, missile attacks or something like that, depending on which platform you're viewing it on. So emojis, they're fun. All right, moving on. All right, so let's talk a little bit about new toys. So we talked about what's happening with ComicBase, and we'll talk in a later show about what's happening with the next major version of ComicBase. We're getting to the season of that one, and we're starting to put some real muscle into getting that one out the door. But we'll talk about that a little closer to its release. For right now, though, I want to talk about other things that have happened just in the last week or so. So first thing off was there was a big Apple event on Tuesday. This was their I forget what they call it, something about California streaming. Which is weird, because as far as I can tell, almost nothing in the actual event had anything to do with streaming. I thought they were going to introduce new software or something like that. But no, I think it was just because they were streaming from California. I don't know. Somebody in marketing was kind of phoning it in that day. But anyway, things that they did do, on the other hand, they introduced a bunch of new iPhones, they introduced a bunch of new iPads, and a new edition of the Apple Watch. Or that's kind of the long and the short of it. Let me pull up my media bank, and I'll see if I can't show you some of this stuff. All right, so let's go to this one over here. All right, and media player number 1. There we are. So those are the new iPhone Pros. You know, the iPhone Pro versus the regular iPhones, more cameras and so forth. And here is the full rundown of iPhone-y type stuff that one can buy today. Basically, you know, if you're in the market for a new iPhone, and I guess if you know, anyone like my mom is watching this one and you've got an old iPhone 6 you're babying along, maybe it's time, instead of swapping the battery, but maybe just buy a new iPhone at this point, because yeah, I mean, there's going to be a pretty good price range all the way down to, you know, a couple $100 that'll get you into a new phone, even if that one's just kind of a retread of one from a few years back, all the way up to brand new models that honestly are much more powerful than the the supercomputers I got my start on, you know, back in college, or back in high school. The iPhone 13 Pro is the top of the line on that one. Starts at $999, goes up to $1,099, and there's probably memory options that'll take you even higher than that one. It comes with massive screens at this point, 6.1, 6.7 inches. I've actually gotten to the point now, just myself, that I'm sitting there going like, yeah, at a certain point, you know, is your hand like a little too small to hold these things comfortably, and are you just going to drop it? But your mileage may vary. Pick the one that's most comfortable for you. The story on those ones, the Pro, they have an f1.5 lens. F is short for f-stop. But basically, it's a measure of how much light the lens can let in at a given moment. So wide open lenses are, you know, just the way lenses work, including your eye, is if you're, you know, if it's wide open, you'll have a very short range of focus, but it will let a lot of light in. You know, very good for, you know, both low light stuff. Also, if you're shooting wide open in daylight, that narrow field of focus, I've kind of got it in the video you're seeing right now. It makes so everything in my background is blurry, so you know, pay more attention to me, but it looks more cinematic. It looks nicer. So yeah, they're saying the new lens lets in 2.2 times what the lens on the 12 Pro let in just from last year. They have night mode across the entire range and so forth. The regular iPhone 13 starts out $699 for the 6.1 inch screen, and goes up from there. That one comes with an A15 processor, just like the iPhone Pro. That's a pretty damn fast processor at this point. I mean, you're talking almost desktop level power on that. Once again, better cameras than the old version. They have an f1.6 lens on the front. They have an ultra wide f2.4 lens, and these are very decent focal lengths. These will actually give you, you know, this is capable, if you use it right, of giving you a picture that's really on par with the sort of thing you would see on TV. So, you know, it's not the nth degree of what you can do with a professional camera rig, but honestly, used skillfully, it's pretty damn good. They're also claiming the new one lets in 47% more light. Both of them come with smaller notches, so that little obstructed area along the front where they're hiding the front-facing camera and a few other things, that's a little smaller, so it interferes with the picture a little bit less. One thing that's kind of interesting is they have a thing called cinematic mode, and this is really a software thing. And they've made the standard across all the cameras. The idea with cinematic mode is that you can more or less do both automatic and manual focus pulling. Focus pulling is the idea that I've got two subjects in the frame. Let's say you're looking at me and you're looking at the bomb, you know, behind me, if I get my thumb going the right way. Let's say you wanted to focus on, you know, as I say, and now you're looking at me, and now let's look at the bomb behind me. You could actually have the camera automatically pull focus back to the bomb, so the bomb would be sharp and I'd be blurry. And you see this in TV shows a lot when they want to demonstrate dialogue where both people are in the same frame for some reason. It can be a very effective move. Typically in a movie set, you've got a guy with a rack pull device where he's literally by remote control, you know, moving the focus knob, you know, as you call these shots out, and you usually like mark off the spots ahead of time and put a little, you know, tick on it, you know, either a piece of tape or even a little metal stopper, so that you can, you know, quickly zoom between the 2 points. These days you can do it all in software, and it's pretty darn slick. Most of the actual, I mean, at this point we've really gotten to the point where the physics of how much light can physically be in a very small piece of plastic, you know, I mean, you're talking about a 1/4 inch size pinhole in a camera. There's only so much light that will ever go through there. It doesn't matter how beautiful the glass is and whatever else. I mean, there's a limit to how much light can get through there. There's a limit to how close you can pack the pixels of the sensor. And we actually haven't seen a ton of improvement, even with double layered pixel sensors and stuff like that, in terms of the physical ability to get things in there and to expose digital sensors. What has really changed over the last 4 or 5 years has largely been software improvements. Really, really ingenious stuff, where you're taking the way that light will fall across two or more of these pixels. They're stacked on top of each other, and you're compensating for the fact that one sensor's behind the other, one are offset by a bit. You're doing that all through software. And there's just incredible digital processing of the image that's hitting those before you see it in the camera. So the end result is it's better, sharper looking pictures than we ever had before, but the physics of how you're doing it is not helping as much as it used to once upon a time. It's all software. So that's a thing. So the good news is also it means, to the extent that it's all software, this is also theoretically upgradable in place. It's just that right now a lot of it is done on chip, and as a result, it's also something that gives you an excuse to buy a new camera or a new phone every couple of years. Other than that, the iPhone Watch came out. Let me show you a picture of that guy. I'm not an iWatch person, but for those of you who are, there were rumors that they were going to square everything off again and make everything straight. Nah, it looks pretty much the same as before. It's curvier though. This is what the side view of that one looks like. Comes all the standard, different, sizes, things like that. It does a couple of new tricks. A little faster processor, a little brighter screen, a little thinner border. These will still set you back $400 to $530. Watch OS 8 is the new hotness in terms of that, and that's going to be shipping on September 20th, so just a couple days from now. And it does a couple of interesting things. They are adding to a technology they introduced a couple generations ago. Apparently you can see it supported as far back as watchOS 5, but you can use your watch in place of your car keys for compatible cars. So, I mean, you knew this was coming as soon as they had basically a device in your pocket. That as soon as I've got a new Nissan, where in just a mid-range car, you walk up to the car and you never actually get your keys out of your pocket. You just it knows you're close, and so because it recognizes the transponder inside the key, you just push the button on the car, it lets you in, you push the button on the starter, it starts the car, and so forth. I never actually look at my keys from time to time. Matter of fact, as a result of that, they have special sensors in the car that let you know when you've accidentally had the keys fall out of your pocket or you left them in there, and so it refuses to lock the doors if the keys are inside, which I hate to say it has saved my butt more than once. The new stuff on this one, you knew it was going to come, is that they're going to adapt this technology so it also starts your car. This is unfortunately still like to become. I mean, it works. It only works for late model BMWs right now. Hyundai has said that they're going to introduce that feature into their 2022 line, but no firm promises as to when that hits. And everyone else is saying, yeah, we're looking at it. I have not seen any other announcements other than BMW as it being a real thing. But yeah, let's keep that in mind. I mean, it's going to, at one point or another, your phone or a device that you carry around with you, like a phone, whether it's your watch or not, is going to wind up being your credit card. It's going to wind up being your car keys. It's going to wind up being your ID. Apple's announced partnerships with several. There are certain states that will allow you to securely store your ID in their wallet, just like you're storing your credit cards, so that when the cop pulls you over on your, you can get out your ID on your phone. So that's a thing. But it's still, like I say, unless you own a late model BMW, and I do not, it's still getting baked into the whole thing. The major feature they added to that one in the new watch is they added ultra wideband capability. So basically, not only can you start your BMW from sitting right in the car, but you can do it from halfway across the parking lot, and presumably you can start the car while you're sitting in a weird seat in it or something. Anyway, the other announcements from the Apple one, there's new iPad and iPad mini. I think I've got a shot of these. No, I guess I didn't bother, because they look exactly like the old ones, but they have a new processor on the regular iPad. That's the big one. That's the A13 processor. It's the same one that was in the phones a couple gens back. They're claiming, of course, that makes it a couple times faster than the requisite Android tablets. They added some better cameras onto it, 12 megapixel cameras. They've got a feature called, what is it called, Center Stage, that basically as you're using your iPad to be either doing selfies or broadcasting or whatever else, it will adjust the framing as I go to always kind of keep you in the middle, even if you're sort of bouncing the iPad all around the place as you go. So, again, software taking the part of hardware innovation on that one, but, it's still kind of cool. The iPad mini is actually, strangely enough, the more advanced of the two. I used to think of the iPad mini as like the cut-down iPad, but it's really kind of become the opposite until you start talking about the iPad Pros, where really what they're doing with the iPad Pros at the top end is they're throwing their desktop M1 chips into an iPad form factor. But for the mainline iPad, the one that got, the form factor, the 10-inch model that got the whole iPad, tablet thing started, that one's really kind of become just sort of a reading device, as opposed to like kind of a portable desktop, or a tablet desktop, sort of thing. It's just where the iPad Pros are going. The iPad mini, on the other hand, is kind of becoming, a fat version of an iPhone that you don't necessarily make calls on. Where that one's actually, it's more expensive. It's got a faster processor. It's got the A15 processor in it. Again, better cameras. They added USB-C support on the Mini. They added a better second iteration of their 5G support once again on the Mini, and it's using a Retina display. So basically, think of the iPad Mini as a big iPhone, and you're not far off, except an iPhone that's really kind of a pain in the butt to make calls on. But again, not like it can't be done using FaceTime and whatnot. It's just, it doesn't typically do it using your regular networks. So anyway, that's the Apple event. Let's do a quick check of chat before we get into other things. That's another bit of news. Somebody just laid out, I think, I'm hearing 3.6 million in the chat. My recollection says it was 3.2 million, but in either case, for Amazing Fantasy 15, which is a 1962 comic book. This is a comic book that existed, let's face it, 10 years ago, pretty much any comic shop worth its salt had an Amazing Fantasy in some kind of shape, which you could have laid out 10, 20 grand for, never explained why you didn't, buy that car instead to your wife. But at the same time, we all could have bought that, issue at some point, in the not very far ago future. We just had a big staff call the other day where we're discussing between the 3 million plus sale of Action Comics, the 3 million plus sale of Amazing Fantasy, and I forget the other one, the Detective Comics number 27. Between that one, where did the ordering belong in terms of adjusting the prices on these ones? Because this is one where when they weren't coming up for auction much, Action Comics number 1 is a good example of that one. The price is just whatever it moved, or at Christie's adjusted a little bit for conditions. So we try to peg what the near mint price would be if you sold a copy that was like the best known copy on the planet, which is better than near mint. Then obviously you have to take that into account a little bit in terms of the adjustment. But that was actually fairly easy to do compared to what happened with Amazing Fantasy 15, where based on previous sales, this thing had a near mint expected value of only about $600,000, and it just went for 3 million plus in 9.6, which is a little better than near mint, but it's a little better than near mint. But dear Lord in heaven, and I located, it might even been the same issue, the same physical comic book, sold I think 5 years ago for 1.1 million in 9.6. So it's crazy what the valuation on this book has been. So yes, when you download this next week's update, if you are playing in that neck of the field, expect to see some dramatic adjustments to your comic collection values should you be lucky enough to own any of those books. All right, moving on. Let's see here. Okay, basic chat back and forth. I'm scanning here for @ComicBase TV. So if I don't see it, then then I'm just going to move on to the next thing. Okay, next up, the Apple stuff basically is all shipping the end of the month. The next thing that's happening, first thing in next month, is Windows 11 is appearing. It's coming out October 15th is the official date. The big change you'll immediately notice: the start menu and the taskbar have all moved to the center of the screen, a lot like a certain popular operating system on those other folks with the M1 chips. Widgets are coming back. And the question I actually have for you guys is, so widgets are basically desktop controls you can sort of lay out in the background. You know, if you had remembered Windows 8 or I believe they had them in Windows 7 as well, you could use them for like gauges of how fast things were moving. You could use them as little, you know, permanent notification areas, you know, so forth. But just very small profile things you could throw out there on the desktop, and they'd, you know, live in a little area and so forth. Is it worth us to make or consider making a ComicBase or Atomic Avenue widget? Something to say, for instance, keeps you posted on your sales, value, your collection, etc. Let us know what you think. The good news is they're pretty easy to make, especially the way they're architected. So if that's something you guys would like to see, especially if you've had a chance to look at Windows 11 for a couple weeks, let us know your thoughts. And that might be something that we'd be interested in doing as well. We're always interested in new stuff. But widgets are returning. There is way cooler multiple monitor support. So for those of us who are rocking more than one monitor and everything, the support on it is getting just really, really nice. You know, not only do they have different ways of snapping your monitor, you know, your windows and your monitors into very nice configurations, basically building on what you do with if you drag a window. Let me show an example of it right now. So let's say I take, let's close up this stuff, but let's say I take this window over here, and you'll notice that as I drag to the top there's a little effect, I'll do it again, where it shows it getting large and going like that. I can also, and it just automatically sizes to that, I can, let me make it narrower. Actually, this one there might be a limit to how narrow I can make it. Let me take, what the heck, I'll take, let me just open up a text window here, my text editor. I'll demo this one around because I know I can size this way any way I want it. So here's just a notepad window. If I drag to the top, you know, it'll go to being full screen like that, or at the very least, this particular type of window wants to size all the way wide, but you can also make it so it sizes all the way top, all the way bottom. If I drag it left or right, if I hit right on the edge of the monitor, a little hard to do, it'll go into a split mode, so you can see, you know, so you can stack two windows side by side very nicely, and so forth. And also, if I'm resizing and I hit the top like this, it'll resize all the way top and bottom. If I take a thin window and I resize all the way to the right, if I hit it exactly, I believe it will also resize all the way left and right, but I think it's really hard to do. Anyway, but the top and bottom ones, that's a good trick if you didn't know that one, to make windows all the way full height. Windows 11 adds a lot more stuff to this. Let me go ahead and move some windows back where they ought to be. All right, and go ahead and put me back on the camera. Windows 11 uses, you know, you can have work sets. You know, so you can say, yeah, this is my work set when I'm using ComicBase. This is my work set when I'm, you know, reading the news and so forth. It'll do that sort of stuff. It'll do it across multiple monitors. It will also does a really, really nice job of if I've got, let's say, a laptop that I hook up to a monitor when I get to where I'm going, of restoring all your window positioning the way you want it last time you were in that configuration. So if you're in those situations, that's actually going to be super helpful, and I think you'll remember that as like, you know, hey, that's about the time when my life got good in terms of multiple monitors. Other than that, you know, right out of the box on Windows 11, interesting things are they're moving a lot of the technology that used to be part of the Xbox. One thing that's nice about the Xbox basically being a Windows PC with a gaming interface on top of it, it's running basically the same kind of software and stuff that that your desktop computer is. So they can leverage a lot of the same technology investments they've made with Microsoft to bring some tech, you know, from the gaming world over to you. So one of the things that's kind of interesting on that one is they have a technology called direct storage, which when you're loading up a game, you can have it, the game can be configured to automatically load all its texture maps and all the game assets directly onto the memory of the graphics card, which makes level switching and things like that just crazy fast. Because they had that worked out on the Xbox, they can take the same technology, roll it into Windows 11, and then you get that when you're playing PC games. So that's kind of neat. What else about that one do I have in my notes there? The other one that we'll all notice right away is a feature called Auto HDR. HDR is basically you're dealing, once again, we're using software to get around the limitations of physics when it comes to things like lenses. But you notice how, like, for instance, your eye is a lens, right? But if it's a bright day outside and you go from, you're looking at, you're living in a mid-lit room, like, your dining room or something like that, and you look outside as the sun's streaming in through the window, there's a moment where your eye can't quite take it in, and what you're really catching for a moment until your eye, iris is down, moves that f-stop down, is you're getting just kind of a white glare out the window. You see this with cameras which don't auto f-stop down when they're shooting a scene and they're in a darkened room and they pan towards the window. The window is just like a big sheet of white, with very little differentiation of anything else that isn't white out of it if the window's bright enough. Anyway, so what they can do, HDR, high definition range imaging. I think I got that. I think I got that one. The acronym wrong, right? If I didn't, someone correct me in the chat. But what they do is they're basically taking multiple exposures. So one lens is a certain focal range and so forth, is going to have a certain amount of detail, a certain amount of focus range on it and so forth. But if you sat there and you took a second one with the iris radiused in a little bit more, you could pull up some more of the darker, some more of the, you'd be radiusing down some of the brighter spots. You'd be able to bring them into the picture because they wouldn't just become pure white anymore. They start to have some definition. And at the same time, you can do the opposite on the other end, where you open it up a little bit more and bring in some more of the shadow detail. If you then composite those images, digitally together, you can get something which physically couldn't have been captured through a regular lens, and it looks a little bit surreal actually when you look at at HDR photography. It's a little bit bigger than life. It looks a little bit artificial. But for things like game worlds, as we're getting very sophisticated in the way that we employ lighting effects and things like that, when you talk about, like, my character he's climbing out of the cave and he's looking up at the mountains, with the sun shining down there with the clouds fluttering by, you can get into a position where the game is being faithful to the physics of the situation, and yet it couldn't possibly show you all those elements and not have some of them be either lost in shadow or blown out entirely. What Auto HDR is doing is it's taking a scene that wasn't made for HDR, wasn't made for this wider than the human eye color gamut and exposure range, and it comps it together as it goes to bring you more detail, while at the same time giving you the widest possible range of exposure in the scene. And it's doing it in real time, which is crazy. I mean, just if you think about the image processing that's involved, and to do that at 60 frames a second is just nuts. But anyway, that's coming. It's a feature that got brought in with the new Xbox Series X's that none of us can get their hands on, and they're bringing that over to the desktops that we have now. So that's going to be pretty cool. And other than that, the last thing I'd say worth mentioning is the Windows Store is going to become the Microsoft Store, and it's going to start doing things like including things like Android apps, which, by the way, will also run on Windows 11. You can, just like you've had the phone companion right now that lets you trigger things on your phone, they've built up an emulation layer so that they can run Android apps on the Windows thing for whatever it's worth. I'm sure you'll find a use for it somehow. But they'll also sell them through the store. And most interestingly is both Apple and Microsoft have also, I think due to recent court pressures, things like the Epic suit and with Fortnite and whatnot, have both announced recently that they're going to, for publishers that don't make a crap ton of money, usually it's like $1 million and under, they're going to allow you to have your alternate payment mechanisms. So in other words, one problem we've had with our app, we initially went through some drama with the Apple Store, where they said, well, your app only runs for people who own ComicBase. Well, you need to sell ComicBase through us. And it's like, well, ComicBase's Windows software. We can't sell it through you. You literally have no way of fulfilling the transaction, even if we wanted to give you 30% of our revenue, which I do not. And then they kind of went, oh, okay, and then they eventually approved it. But anyway, everyone else, the deal has been for a very long time is if you sell through the either of these stores, that the store is taking 30% of your money. And they want that even if what you were selling is, oh, we'll give you a free app, but then you can have an in-game purchase that, you know, unlocks, you know, the really good features or unlocks, you know, new loot and things like that. They wanted to take 30% of that too. A lot of times what people would do is, you know, I mean, you do anything, if you're a small developer, you do anything to avoid having some big Goliath of a company eat 30% of your revenue. Anything from, I'll put the demo of my software up on the App Store, but if you want the real one, you have to go through me and then we'll give you the secret instructions on how to sideload it if you're on Android or whatever else. All the way up through, anyway, it's just been crazy amounts of friction. It kind of culminated with Epic launched their own store just to compete with Apple because they didn't want to give up the revenue and so forth. Anyway, apparently both platforms are going to make it so that you can now, if you're willing to run your own payment processing, they'll let you keep your own money. So that could really change the face of this thing. I'm interested to see what that opens up. So anyway, let's see if there are any comments on that, and then we'll move on. Okay, let's see here. Oro, ComicBase TV with 63 live streams. Let me go out of this one. I can't remember all the questions that have been asked. Thoughts on index of questions or transcripts? Perhaps the group here could ask a few, like a wiki. Honestly, that'd be awesome. I don't know when I'm ever going to find the time. I mean, the very first time I did a live stream of this one, they were about half an hour long. I was thinking like, oh, this would be great if I could like set chapter markers and put a little in tables of context and, you know, and wiki the whole thing out. This would be great. And then I realized after I'd done about 2 of them that no way have I got the time to do that. It's a great thought. I'm going to need help from somebody else to make that happen if anyone feels like a volunteer on that one. But yeah, these are things I kind of carve out of my day in order to make it happen, because, you know, you're a small business guy, you're working, you know, a light week for me is 60 hours, and they get, when it's a really, really bad week, it's 110 hours. So when we start adding like, and let's spend an hour or two, you know, indexing your live stream and scrubbing through your old, you know, stuff and everything, it's like, dude, I just don't know where that's coming from unless it's my sleep, and I got little enough of that already. So, but no, I would love to see that. If anyone wants to step up, please write pbickford at human-computing.com, and that'd be cool. And Audrey wanted to remind me, the new version of the cover catalog is out and waiting for all you guys. So yeah, go ahead and check that out. Absolutely. Let's see here. All right. Let's see. And Andre still wants the time fixed in the Sidekick for the update. The issue, if I'm getting it right, and correct me if I don't, is that Sidekick right now is reporting the if you say the last update date in the little status window on Sidekick, it's telling you the last time it updated your database. It's not telling you the last time the database was updated by anything. So if you update it in ComicBase, that's not going to be the same time. It's a decent thing to do, and what we'll probably do is we'll start, you know, looking at these things in turn and reading. There's a record we write inside the database itself that tells when it was last updated, as opposed to the log file of Sidekick, which is what we're using right now. And yes, we plan to do that. It'll probably be something that we throw into the next major version of ComicBase, though. All right, I think those are all the ones I saw that were tagged for me. Oh, wait, one more. Yes, whatever you do draw the line to not work more than 168 hours per week. Yeah, no, I think my personal record is something like 120 something. And so what you're doing is you're talking about multiple all-nighters in the course of a week, followed by a hard crash at the end. Don't do that, kids. It's not that much fun. Well, I'll put it this way. If you're doing it, do it for something you care about a lot. So anyway, that's about it. All right, so moving on. All right, so Windows 11 is coming October 5th, so it'll be here before you know it. I hope your system works on it. This will be one of these things that causes us all to upgrade our motherboards if we haven't done them recently. I would say if your motherboard is not running at least 9th generation Intel, so if you look at your processor's ID number in the Windows system information, make sure it says at least, it's like an i7-9 XXX 9500, 9100, whatever the thing is. The 9 tells you the generation. If it's 10 900, it's 10th generation. 11 900, it's the 11th generation, and so forth. But if you have anything that's like an 8700K or anything older than that, yeah, I would say, as I understand it right now, Microsoft will allow you to install Windows 11, but they will not give you updates for it. Do not do this, my friends. You do not want to have an operating system that you can't have updates for, because 2 seconds after it's released, some hacker will figure a way to cause drama on it. You want to be able to get that security patch when Microsoft tells you, oh yeah, whoops, So stick with Windows 10 if you don't have. Even if Microsoft will let you install it on your older hardware, don't do it. Would be my strong advice. So if you have a motherboard that's more than about 3 years old, yeah, look for a new computer at some point. And I'd say hold off using Windows 11 until that point. Now, for your new computer, things to look for. So let's talk about processors for a minute. So I'm a Intel guy. I hear nice things about AMD, but honestly, I have never invested enough in the platform to know in great detail. Now, for a couple, 3 generations, so the last 3-4 years since I built my last PC, if I were doing it again today and I had to do it today, I probably would build a AMD Threadripper based thing, because AMD has been kicking it, absolutely ripping up the place in terms of driving the processor speed forward. Well, Intel's really struggled to move their manufacturing process down to get it's more silicon traces on the die. They have to move them finer and finer as they go, and there's lots and lots. I mean, you're really talking about nanometer scale technology, and there's a lot of physical problems that get in the way of that one. It's not an easy thing to do, and Intel in particular has struggled mightily on that one. AMD has kind of during that time been more successful in their efforts to drive things forward, and for a while they really were able to get more done. Intel's kind of coming back to the game there with their 12th generation chips, which are called the code name for those is Alder Lake. Those are due out in Q4, so everyone thinks October. I didn't hear a more specific date than that. But the exciting parts about this one, they're going to be based on a 10 nanometer process. You can have 16 cores maximum. It'll involve a new socket, so of course, new motherboard. They think it'll be overall about 22% faster than the competition than a Ryzen 5950X. And think of it being about 20% faster overall than your current machine. If you had the exact same spec of the previous Intel chip, think that it's going to run about 20% faster overall in terms of real operations. Now, the sexy parts of it, honestly, aren't to me the chip. The processors are kind of, I mean, you're throwing more processors and more cores at your problems, but they're not speeding up the way they used to 10, 15 years ago. It used to be like, you'd buy a machine 3 years later than your old one, and it would be guaranteed to be 2 times as fast as your old one. We haven't seen that kind of speed increase for quite a while. Back in the late 90s, we started running into thermal limits, where basically just upping the clock speed on your processor was building up so much heat that people had to try different ways of getting more performance out of the same clock cycles. Just because the heating problem just got to be unsolvable, even with like liquid coolers and really involved cooling solutions. They've done a good job on that one, but it's really been a struggle. It wasn't like the boom times of the 60s through about the early 90s. After that, things have slowed down a lot. But some things that are coming along that are pretty sexy. There's PCI Express 5.0, which I'll talk about in a second, and DDR5 Memory. Those are going to be stock with the motherboards to support the new Alder Lake architecture from Intel. And those ones actually start mattering. Before we do that, though, take a brief foray into the other things in your system that make a difference in your life. Let's start with graphic cards. And the short version of that is forget about it. It's nothing to talk about because, yeah, they're making faster graphic cards. They're really cool, and you can't get them. I mean, it's that nuts. We're talking 18 months or 20 months into COVID foo, and there's no excuse for this other than you have a storm of diminished, capacity out of the fabs that are making them. They're not able to crank them as hard as they have to because of staffing issues due to COVID and everything else. A whole supply chain that got impacted by COVID. You have everyone and their brother is working from home now and wanting faster rigs to work on. And then you have cryptocurrency, which basically every spare card that you could possibly sell, is getting bought up by people who are using them to mine cryptocurrency and turn it into money, preferably if you can steal someone else's power to do it. Between those three factors, you can't get graphic cards. You just can't. If you do, you'll be getting them off of eBay for a guy who's charging 3 times list price on them. It's just nuts. So whatever your graphic card is, I hope it's good enough. Best you can do if you're looking for a graphic card and you don't want to pay extortionate amounts of money is buy a system that has one already built into it, because the manufacturers of complete systems like Alienware have a little bit more pull to get graphic cards than you or I do. Actually, they have quite a bit more pull than you or I do. But other than that, I think all we can do on graphic cards is wait till next year and hope it gets better. But it's not getting better anytime soon. All right, let's get back to the stuff that is better. All right, so let's start with PCI Express. PCI Express is basically the bus that connects the really high bandwidth things, the things that need a lot of oomph to your computer, so the computer and can talk to them as quickly as possible. So the typical one, of course, is a graphics card. Sometimes you also get your SSDs, your solid state drives are connected in through the PCIe bus. But anything that needs to move a hell of a lot of data fast is occupying that big card slot in your machine. So PCI Express 5.0 is coming out in October. It's a real thing. You can buy motherboards with it on it right now. Anyway, that one has 2 times the data transfer rate of PCI Express 4. What that amounts to, just to give you an idea of how damn fast this thing is. So you have different there's 16 possible lanes, basically it's a signaling wire you can use to move the data back and forth, and you can use up to 16 of them at a time. 8's more typical because you want 8 in either direction. So think of it like, think of it like a road where you got, eight lanes of traffic in one direction and then 8 lanes heading the other way back, telling the thing that, 8 lanes worth of data saying, here's a bunch of data, and 8 lines to say back, and here's what I think about it, or here's data for you, is going in the outbound direction. So, but if you're talking about 16 lanes involved in what you're doing, it can move, let me look at the stat right now, 63 gigabits per second. I wrote gigabytes per second for an X8 lane, and that's 126 gigabytes per second for a X16 lane. This is psychotic. I mean, we're talking about a Blu-ray worth of data in less than a second. This is just crazy amounts of bandwidth. And where this gets used is doing things like driving 8K monitors and so forth. Just nutty amounts of data. I'm all about the speed, so I'll take it. Even though I rarely use anything approaching that, I would love that on my next computer. I'll tell you about why, because of the things I do. But first of all, let's talk about DDR5 memory. So what we're all using on our computers right now, it's DDR3 if we have an older rig, we have DDR4 if we have a more modern rig. DDR5 is coming along, and again, it's coming along with Alder Lake, so you can get this. Basically, you can put your order in for the board now. It does a couple things. Runs on a little bit lower voltage, so it doesn't beat the power supply up quite as badly. The maximum data rate, once again, twice as fast as the one before. That one will move at 6.4 gigabytes per second, which is to say, that's what is it? 1.5 DVD. So a DVD is 9 gigabytes. So you can move a DVD's worth of data both sides in 1.5 seconds down the memory bus. The bandwidth is also better. It is moving at 32 gigabytes per second. That's just the raw bandwidth of the memory. The thing that's potentially more interesting for some of our applications, like if we're doing a lot of video editing or heavy game development or things like that, is that they can pack more data closer together. So they can fit 64 gigabytes on a single die, or 128 gigabytes on a single DIMM, one of the single sticks of memory. So think about it this way: if your next computer happens to have 4 sticks of 4 SIM slots or DIMM slots in it, you're talking about 512 gigabytes of memory. I'm sorry, not gigabytes. Yeah, did I have that right? Yeah, you're talking about 512 gigabytes of RAM. That's not disk. That's RAM. So yeah, psychotic amounts of memory. I don't honestly. I don't know what to tell you to do with it. Right now, in any application I use, having more than 32 gigs of memory doesn't seem to make a lick of difference. But I know people who work a lot with mathematical applications and things like that, where you literally cannot have enough memory in your machine, and they're going to be overjoyed at the thought of this one. All right, on to the part that I do care about, SSDs, right? So let's take it. My favorite thing in the world, solid-state disk drives, and you can put them on a PCI Express 5.0 bus. What can you get out of them? Well, for stuff that is shipping very, very shortly, we are currently looking at 16 gigabytes per second read speeds. So what does that make it? You're able to read off of, I love how the read speeds are faster than the RAM. It's but the SSD is able to read the thing at 16 gigabytes per second and do up to 9.9 gigabyte per second writes. So again, you're looking at the ability to write basically a DVD's worth of data, both sides, in a second. This I love. I can't get enough. And honestly, I've done tech support this week on folks with older rigs where they were getting 256 kilobytes per second at times, and I was like, yeah, it's really time to upgrade your computer. Most of us, if we're using conventional drives right now, if our drive's really doing good, it's moving 20 to 30 megabytes per second. As soon as you're moving into SSDs, you typically, if you have one of the ones that's mounted on the ATA bus, the SATA bus. Typically, you start moving at about 600-700 megabytes per second, which is damn good. You're talking 20-30 times the speed of your old physical disk. And as soon as you get the SSDs that are basically, they look like a chip, but they're mounting right on the PCI Express bus. They're called NVMe, non-volatile memory. Enhanced, expanded, I don't know what these for, but NVMe SSDs, those are the ones you want if you're building a new computer right now. Those ones can move thousands right now, and they will be able to move, I think, we're looking at 9,000 megs per second, so 9 gigabytes per second to write, and 16,000 megabytes per second to read. So yeah, absolutely. That gets me excited, because basically it means that almost everything we do in ComicBase is disk bound, and it means that all that stuff just goes so fast. So anyway, that's the cool stuff. All right, let me do a quick check of the chat before we check it out. Let's see. It's not true that the motherboard, if you have a board max 10 years old and have an Intel, you have the same feature in the CPU. Just look online for that. I'm not sure what in particular you're referring to on that one, Andre. If you can give me a little more in the chat, that'd be cool. So what happens, typically motherboards, when Intel does a new socket or AMD does a new socket design, so you've got a little chip like this with about 1 million pins on the back, and it nestles down in a little clip, and that package, they call it, fits into a particular socket design. That then has to have different accompanying circuitry that manages the power, that manages the firmware and so forth, but it also tends to tie in pretty intimately with things like the PCI Express bus and the SATA buses. SATA is the it's the replacement for the old, remember those old drive cables that used to be about 1 million pins in them, you'd wave all over the place. SATA was the replacement for that one, and so forth. The really fast stuff these days wants to link straight into the PCI Express bus. But anyway, all that, typically when you release a new master chip, a new CPU, it kind of comes out at the same time as the motherboard that supports all the surrounding technology. They try to sync up those devices, which is why someone like Intel will actually design the whole blueprint for the whole board. Now, different companies then will take that blueprint for the whole board and say, yeah, okay, I like that, but let's add, I want more USB chips, more USB ports, or I want to add a Thunderbolt port, or I want to do things like that. There will be ways of hooking on and expanding that basic design, but you'll tend to design the whole motherboard at once to go along with the chip release. That's why things like PCI Express 5 are getting synced up with a new series of motherboards. Same thing with DDR5. But if there's a point I've missed, please let me know, and I'll try to correct myself. Anyway, so other things are coming out, and I think this is kind of getting to about the end of the tech that's coming out, because this one gets, it's everything else is coming out very, very shortly, with the exception of the graphic cards, which again, just crush your dreams right now. You're not getting a new one. But the one that's frustrating for me, because I've had a love-hate relationship with it since it started. USB. So we all are using what that thing with the squarish ends, the rectangular ends, that whatever end we try to plug it in with is always the wrong one. So we plug it in, say no, that didn't work, flip it over, and then plug it in again. And it's uncanny how every single time we get it wrong. That one is a USB-A connector. That was then it would have a USB-B was the one that was kind of like I don't know, it looks like a railway tunnel, in terms of the shape. On the other end, that would typically be what goes in your printer or one of those old school devices. These things then got replaced. They had mini USB on one hand. They'd have micro USB was on our old phones a couple of generations ago. USB-C is the current hotness. It's the little, at some point they figured out, they took a tip from Apple, and they figured out that having a connector that works whether you plug it in this way or this way is a really great thing. It causes way less frustration. So Apple did that with their Lightning connectors, later on Thunderbolt and so forth. And the folks who do USB, I think it's the USB Consortium or USB IF Interface Working Forum. I forget what the IF stands for. But anyway, they figured out that, oh yeah, having a reversible connector is really cool. Let's do that. And they came up with USB-C. That's the one that's on all of our current phones. If you have a brand new hub, it's probably the little micro-E connector that came with that one, the one you can flip in either way and you never get it wrong. That one's sweet. So that's the physical connector. Now, the standard that goes along with that one, though, is a different deal. So when USB-A connectors came out, they came out with USB 1.0. It had a certain speed. I want to say it was something like 12 megabits per second. It was something very, very leisurely compared to that. USB 2.0 came out, doubled it. USB 3 came out, doubled it again. And then 3.1 came out, 3.2 came out, and so forth. They started adding other things that it could do. They started at some point adding the ability to throw power down it and so forth. So you can use your USB-C connectors oftentimes to power up your phone at the same time you're charging it. So you can use the pins for different things. USB 4 is coming up, and they're doing their usual bang-up job of making it about as complicated as you can possibly come up with, which is they're using a USB-C style connector. So that little micro reversible one, that's the connector. It's also the same connector you're using for Thunderbolt, if you guys know Apple stuff. That's the same beast under the hood. Now, the good news on this one is USB 4 will come in either 20 gigabit per second speed or 40 gigabit per second speed. The 40 gig is the same as Thunderbolt 3 in terms of speed. It will do DisplayPort 2.0, which essentially means it can drive an 8K monitor at 60 hertz with HDR 1.0 in effect. And then that can go all the way up to 80 gigabits per second for data transfer. So we're talking a damn fast little cable now. I mean, we're hundreds, if not thousands of times faster than the original USB cables at this point. And so also think about your external SSDs and things like that running down there. They are going to really cook. I mean, they're going to be as good as anything that you have internal right now. Now, the part where it gets a little weird is even though you're using USB-C connectors for all the stuff, and that is wonderful. We never want to do USB-A again, and good news, USB-A is probably going away at some point, because there's no one's going to want to build new things with it except as some kind of weird backward use your old cables kind of compatibility thing until they've used up all the current production run or something. At this point, USB-C cables, they're smaller, they're less prone to wear and so forth. No reason to not make everything USB-C at this point from a physical connector standpoint. Now, as far as what the cable itself is and what the standard going down that cable is, should it be Thunderbolt? Should it be USB 4? Well, as it turns out, it's kind of both. Thunderbolt was a technology Intel devised that they used to charge special licensing for, which is why Apple was about the only people initially who jumped onto it in a big way, paid the license because it gave them something to differentiate themselves based on. Intel at a certain point decided that they were shooting themselves in the foot and that no one could figure out what the different 3.1, 3.2, Thunderbolt 2, 3, 4, no one could figure out what all this stuff was about, and they decided, you know what, for the sake of the larger picture here, let's just drop the licensing on Thunderbolt. And so now you can actually adopt Thunderbolt-y type things. Well, what they did kind of is they rolled all the capabilities that they wanted in Thunderbolt, they let them be used by USB now. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, Thunderbolt requires certain capabilities, like the 40 gigabytes per second bandwidth, but they don't require it for USB 4. So in other words, a Thunderbolt, and they decided instead of, we're going to use Thunderbolt 4 as our packaging term to describe USB 4 with all the bells and ribbons attached. We're going to call that Thunderbolt 4, which you also could buy a cable that is a USB 4 cable labeled with 40 gigabits per second on it, and let me show you a beautiful picture of the ever so clear labeling standard they came up with on this one. This is wonderful stuff. You guys have probably stared at your old cables and tried to figure, is this a high-speed cable? Is it a low-speed cable? I don't know. And you stare for the super speed or the whatever logo on it. So now, to clear it all up, this is how they're going to label the physical cables and the physical logos on them. Basically, the one you're going to be looking for is this one on the right here. It says is at least 40 gigs per second. Transfer on the whole thing, and this will be the thing you get on the packaging and on the logo and so forth. This is kind of the equivalent of saying it's USB with all the good stuff built in. Another way you could look for that is look for a thing that says Thunderbolt 4. Because if it's a Thunderbolt 4 one, it'll do USB 4 with all the good stuff. It'll work on the same computers. It'll do all the same stuff. A USB cable, though, plugged into a Thunderbolt thing won't necessarily do all the stuff that Thunderbolt is expecting. So, yeah, as usual, a complete frickin' mess. For what it's worth, they have decided that they're going to do away with the point thing. It's just USB 4. It's not USB 4 point anything. They said, we're not going to do a 4.1. We're not going to do a 4.2. It's just USB 4, which honestly, in terms of buying cables, there's some length limitations and differences like that, but I think if it came down to me right now, I'd be looking for a computer with Thunderbolt 4 on it, and just everything else, I'd be reading the fine print to see that it went as fast as it possibly can. Now, strangely enough, you can get Thunderbolt 4 stuff right now. You just have to buy it from Apple, because they built it onto their M1 chips. 4 is backward compatible with 3, but it basically is a way of saying that the same cable will do all the good stuff. But as for the rest of it, you can buy motherboards from $259. I found a couple of them right now which have Thunderbolt 4 support on the whole thing. This one we're not necessarily waiting for the Intel chips on this one. Apple did get ahead on this one, but right now I'm seeing docks with support for USB 4. I'm not seeing a lot of devices with USB 4 support right now, but it's very reasonable to think that the next generation of things like external SSDs would want to get on board that and use all the new speed. So anyway, that's kind of the big roundup of everything that I could see is on the horizon as far as cool stuff. On compliment point out, because I was trying to figure out remember the name of the old standards on some of these ones. Yeah, IDE, which, God, was it interface integrated digital. Oh God, I forget what I used to. I swear to God, I used to know what all this stuff stood for. But anyway, IDE was the ginormous flat ribbon cables that were just impossible to sneak around anything, which are always in the way. SATA cables were the ones that you could hot plug in and out, which are much smaller in the cases. And then SCSI were the frickin' nightmare ones. That one I do remember. Small Computer Systems Interface. We all called them SCSI. I think some wags over at Apple for about 3 minutes tried to convince everyone that they were called sexy, because I think they went all of 5 megabits per second. You know, when they were really rocking. I think they eventually came up with multiple versions of SCSI that went all the way up to 40 megs per second. But there were so many, you know, active terminators and device ID numbers and so much food that had to be configured to make this stuff work. No one except Apple and a couple of enterprise things ever really went in for it. Although the first several scanners I had that were like really serious scanners were all SCSI scanners. But I do not miss those for a frickin' minute. All right, so, and Oro says, sigh, so my nice 8-core i7-6900 is a worthless little brick. Yeah, look, if, you know, give it to the kids. I mean, it's, you know, like the usual advice is if it's still working for you, no reason it shouldn't stop working. But it is not, as they say, ready for the future. So, yeah, no, it's time to, you know, think about, you know, throwing some new, you know, breaking open the piggy bank and buying yourself something new for Christmas. But I probably would wait till Christmas, because at this point, if I'm gonna buy a brand new motherboard, I would want PCI Express 5 on it. I would want, and you know, if you're sticking with Intel, I'd want an Alder Lake processor on it. You know, just for laughs, I'd probably want DDR5 memory on. Although at this point, the memory's so far of the game, that's not usually my problem on anything that matters. But the things I wind up waiting for on a computer, I wind up waiting on graphics when I'm doing very heavy-duty graphics stuff. You know, because that's something where if you're really rocking a heavy rig, you want to be seeing 60 or more frames per second, you know, at the prettiest resolutions with anti-aliasing and everything else you can get out of it. That's what you're hoping for out of your beautiful immersive, you know, game experience. So your graphic card is always going to be your big limiter today. But beyond that, you know, I come from the database world, and it's all about disk. And it's a little bit about processor, but it's 99% of what you're waiting for is disk. So anything I can do to make my SSD, you know, first of all, get to an SSD. Once you get to an SSD, get to an NVMe SSD. So again, that's like a tripling or so of the speed you'll get out of that one. And you know, when you start doing things like, you know, 4K video editing and stuff like that, I want as big and as fast of a SSD as I can afford, and I want to stick it on the biggest, fastest bus I can get. And then I always stuff my case full of memory just so it can process everything without ever hitting the disk again. So that's the stuff that kind of gets me excited about the next generation. Other than that, yeah, no, I love the idea of faster USB speeds for things like external drives. So anything to let me transfer, you know, we have big storage drives that, you know, have many terabytes on them that we use for backing up all the computers on the networks here at ComicBase. And you know, if anything we can do to make those run faster so they're closer to the native speed of the drive, that's always a win for me. But for the rest of us, yeah, no, it's time to kick the old, you know, 7th generation Intel one to the curb, probably. You know, give it to the kids to play, you know, play Fortnite on or whatever else. But yeah, for doing the new sexy stuff, yeah, probably move up. All right, integrated drive electronics. Or I like the other one offered by Greg Hecht, incompetent DC executives. All right, well, that's about it. And Andre also says, and nothing you can do is you can make an NAS, network attached storage, out of your old PC. All right, and that is a good idea. Andre agrees. All right, well, that's about it, guys. I gotta go. Next time will be a much more conventional show. Probably be spending more time just answering questions from y'all. In the meantime, I gotta get on the road, get some food in me, get some coffee in a thermos, and drive down to Florida. Wish me luck, and then after that, hopefully a new place will even have some furniture in it, so that'll be cool. Okay, that's about it, guys. Thanks again for attending, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.